the widow of Red Rock. The shovel struck the earth with a hollow thud. Dry dirt rattled down onto a wooden lid, each grain sounding louder than the silence around it. Eliza Boone's hands trembled on the handle, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she buried. The last piece of her husband's belongings, a worn leather hat, rested atop the grave, the brim frayed from years of wind and work. The canyon wind rose, tugging her black shawl, whispering in tones only she seemed to hear. She leaned forward, pressing her palm flat against the marker she had carved herself. The name was shallow, gouged into rough pine. Jonah Boone, 1829 to 1875. Her lips moved, barely a sound escaping. One last promise, my love. I won't let them take what's ours. Hoofbeats. Faint at first, then louder, rolling like thunder against the stone walls of Red Rock Canyon. She straightened, her shadow stretching long in the sinking light. For riders came over the ridge, dust blooming around them, laughter sharp as broken glass. The McCade brothers. Eliza's hand slipped instinctively to her side, brushing the folds of her dress where no weapon showed. She stepped back from a grave, chin lifted, eyes narrowing against the setting sun. "Afternoon, widow," one called, his voice slick with mockery. "We was wonderin' if you'd finally packed your things. This patch of dirt ain't fit for a lady." Their horses snorted, restless under the stench of whiskey and sweat. The youngest brother, Caleb, spat into the dust near the grave. Eliza did not flinch. "This ground," she said, voice steady, "is Boone ground. It stays Boone ground." Laughter split the air. A raven burst from the canyon rim, wings black against the burning sky. "Boone's gone cold, ma'am," drawled another. "And soon enough, so will you." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving churned earth and jeers echoing behind them. Eliza stood alone, the desert light bleeding red across her husband's grave. Her hand clenched the shawl tighter. For a long moment she didn't move, only listened to the wind as it hissed through the brush, as though Jonah himself breathed in it still. The town of Red Rock sat 6 miles east, its main road a strip of dust caught between 2 rows of sagging buildings. The saloon's piano wheezed out of tune, tinny notes drifting through warped shutters. Children's laughter was long gone. Families had fled when silver veins dried, leaving behind only drifters, rustlers, and those too stubborn to quit. Eliza walked the street with her basket of supplies, every step watched in silence. Women whispered behind curtains. Men tipped hats, but avoided her eyes. Even the sheriff, leaning against the post of his office with a toothpick wagging between his lips, looked past her as though she were smoke. "Best think about sellin', Miss Boone," he muttered when she passed. "Ain't no shame in movin' on." Her reply was a glare sharp enough to cut rope. Inside the general store, the air reeked of dust and molasses. She set flour, coffee, and lamp oil on the counter. The shopkeeper, old Harris, shifted nervously. "You shouldn't walk alone, Eliza," he whispered. "McCade's been sniffin' round. Folks say they mean to take your place by week's end." Eliza counted out coins, the sound crisp on the counter. "Let them mean," she said, voice low. "A man's word buried in the ground still holds weight." That night, the sky flared orange at the horizon. Eliza jolted awake to the smell of smoke. She ran barefoot across the yard, the barn crackling with fire. Horses screamed inside, hooves pounding against timbers. She wrenched the latch free, dragging the panicked animals out into the night while sparks rained down like stars turned to ash. By dawn, only blackened beams remained. The McCade's warning was written in smoke. Eliza stood before the ruins, her face streaked with soot. She said nothing, only turned back toward the house. In a loft, hidden beneath a loose board, lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers tracing the cold steel of an old revolver. The barrel shone faintly even in the dark, its ivory handle cracked but familiar. She ran a cloth over the weapon, movements deliberate, almost reverent. When the chamber clicked open, her hands were steady. She loaded each round, the sound of brass sliding into place echoing through the still house. Outside, the wind carried the distant laughter of coyotes. 3 days later, Eliza rode out into the canyon. The sun sank low, throwing long shadows that danced against the stone walls. She dismounted, tying her horse to a cedar stump, and walked into the clearing where the ground bore the scars of old bullets. She lifted the revolver, its weight solid in her hand. At first her arm trembled, years of disuse stiff in her bones. She exhaled. The tremble ceased. The first shot cracked, ricocheting against rock. Dust plumed from a boulder's face. Another shot followed, then another, each one smoother, faster, truer. Her hand moved as though memory itself guided it, as though the years between had never passed. By the time the cylinder clicked empty, 6 holes dotted the stone, tight and clean. She lowered the revolver, smoke curling upward like a ghost. Somewhere beyond the canyon, the sun slipped lower, bleeding gold into red. Eliza closed her eyes, the sound of the shots still ringing in her ears. Her husband's voice seemed to drift on the wind, faint but sure. Don't let them break you. And there, in the silence of the desert, the widow of Red Rock made her vow again, not with words, but with the steady weight of steel in her hand. Storms over dust and blood. The saloon doors slammed open. Boot heels struck wood like hammer blows, spurs jangling with every step. The piano cut off mid-note, the player's hands frozen above yellowed keys. Smoke hung low, curling from cheroots abandoned in ashtrays. The McCade brothers filled the room like wolves among sheep. Dust clung to their coats, whiskey already burning on their breath. Silas McCade, the eldest, strode forward, his grin wide and rotten. "Evenin', boys," he drawled. "Heard the widow Boone still thinks she owns that stretch of canyon." Chair scraped back. No one answered. The barkeep polished the same glass twice, eyes fixed on the floor. Caleb laughed, high and sharp. "Town's awful quiet. Ain't nobody gonna tell us otherwise." He thumped the butt of his rifle on the floor. "Didn't think so." Silas leaned across the bar, his voice low but carrying. "By sundown Sunday, Boone's ranch will be ours. Anybody got a problem with that?" Silence stretched long. Then a whisper rose from the back. One old ranch hand, drunk enough to forget fear. "She won't give in." The room froze. Silas turned his head slow, eyes like cold iron. He spat on the floor and let out a chuckle. "She will," he said, "or she'll be buried beside her man." Laughter roared from the brothers, rattling glasses. The piano player resumed, shaky notes trembling through the haze. But no one missed the way the townsfolk lowered their heads, as though the widow herself had already been condemned. That night, a creak in the dark stirred Eliza awake. She rose, lamp in hand, the glow casting long shadows across bare wooden walls. Outside, the water trough glimmered faintly under the moon. She stepped closer, nostrils flaring at the acrid tang rising from it. Dead fish floated belly up, the stench of poison. Her jaw tightened. She tipped the trough, spilling the water into the dirt until only mud remained. The horses shifted in the corral, uneasy. A coyote's howl carried across the plain, answered by laughter. Not animal laughter. Men. The McCades were near, watching from the dark. Eliza did not call out. She only turned back inside, bolting the door, her hand brushing against the revolver resting on the table. At dawn she rode into town. Hoofs struck dust from the road, her black shawl snapping in the morning wind. Faces turned toward her as she passed, faces that quickly looked away. Mothers pulled children indoors. A preacher bowed his head, lips moving in silent prayer. On the steps of the church, Eliza dismounted and knelt before the cross planted in hard ground. Her lips barely moved, whispering words the breeze carried away. Then she rose, dusted her skirt, and walked on. In the general store, Harris wrung his hands behind the counter. "Eliza," he whispered, "it ain't safe. They'll burn you out, one piece at a time. Best sell while you can still walk away." She laid a sack of coins on the wood. "I'm not selling," she said flatly. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "People forget, but I remember. I remember that name you carried once." The whisper. Eliza's eyes flicked up, sharp as a blade. "That name is buried." Harris swallowed, looking away. "Maybe so, but the McCades don't scare easy, and a promise won't stop bullets." Her hand closed around the sack, dragging it back across the counter. "A promise," she said, "is heavier than bullets." Evening fell heavy with storm clouds. Lightning flickered along the horizon, painting the canyon ridges in ghostly light. Eliza sat by her window, the revolver laid across her lap, her husband's duster folded on the chair beside her. She closed her eyes, and memory carried her backward. Jonah's laugh echoing as he hammered the last board into their porch, his calloused hands covering hers as they set fence posts under a rising sun. The way he'd taken her face in his palms the night before he died, whispering through broken breath, "Don't let them break you, Liza. Don't let them take what we built." She opened her eyes to the storm. Rain struck the windows, thunder rolling across the plains like war drums. Out there, somewhere in the dark, she knew the McCade's road. The storm broke with dawn. She walked the charred remains of her barn, boots sinking in wet ash. A scorched board cracked underfoot. She bent, lifted it, and felt the brittle wood snap in her hands. The preacher appeared at the edge of her land, hat in hand. His voice was soft, strained. "Child," he said, though she was nearly his age, "vengeance weighs the soul. Maybe it's time to lay it down." Eliza looked at him, rain dripping from her lashes, revolver still hanging at her side. Her voice was quiet, almost lost to the wind. "My soul's already weighed. What's left is promise." The preacher held her gaze a long moment, then lowered his head. He turned back toward town, his figure swallowed by mist and distance. That night, she saddled her horse again. The canyon yawned wide and hollow, moonlight spilling silver across the stone. She set bottles along the ridge, each one glinting like a star in the dark. The revolver rose. Her finger curled. Crack, glass shattered. Crack, another burst into dust. The echoes rolled long through the canyon, as if the earth itself repeated her vow. By the time she lowered the revolver, the bottles were gone, the ridge scarred with holes. She holstered the weapon, breath slow, steady. From the shadows above, unseen eyes watched. One of the McCade brothers crouched low, lips curled into a grin. He had seen enough to carry back. Back in town, the whispers grew louder. The widow's practicing. She's gone mad. Maybe she aims to fight him. No one said it above a hush, but the saloon was alive with rumors. The sheriff heard them, too, but kept to his chair, chewing his toothpick. Silas McCade leaned against the bar, listening, his grin never fading. "Let her practice," he said, voice slick as oil. "By Sunday, we'll see if her hand's quicker than 4 guns." He raised his glass, and his brothers joined, the toast swallowed by laughter. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. And on the edge of Red Rock, in the dim glow of her lamplight, Eliza Boone sat polishing the revolver again, her reflection staring back from steel. The whisper returns. The church bell tolled once, slow and heavy, the sound rolling across Red Rock like thunder trapped in iron. Folks gathered along the main street, faces pale in the glare of the dying sun. The McCade brothers were coming. Everyone knew it. Children were dragged indoors, shutters slammed tight. Only the preacher stood by the church steps, Bible in hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. From the far end of town rose dust, 4 riders cutting through the light, their silhouettes black against the blood-red sky. And then, from the opposite end, another figure stepped into the road. Eliza Boone. No shawl, no basket. She wore Jonah's duster, long and weathered, the hem brushing the dirt. Her hat brim shadowed her face, but the steel at her side caught the light, unmistakable. The revolver was strapped low, the leather worn smooth from an old hand that once knew its weight like blood knew a vein. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A whisper passed from lip to lip. The whisper. The McCades slowed their horses, laughter cutting through the stillness. "Well, looky here," Silas drawled. "The widow thinks she's sprouted iron." Caleb spat into the dust. "Pretty gun for a woman that can't shoot." Eliza's boots scuffed once as she took another step into the center of the street. Her voice carried, low but clear, steady as stone. "You've taken enough. You won't take more." Her hand rested on the revolver, fingers loose, her body still as carved rock. Flash of memory, her breath shallow as Jonah's last words rattled in his chest. "Don't let them break you." The blood on her hands that day, his blood, seeping into the dirt where he fell. Her scream buried in the canyon wind. Then silence. Years of silence. Until now. The brothers dismounted, boots sinking into the dust. Guns glinted at their hips, spurs ringing with each step. They spread out in a half circle, grins wide, eyes hungry. 4-1, ma'am, Silas said. Reckon your odds are poor. Eliza tipped her hat back, revealing eyes as cold as river stones. I ain't counting odds, she said. The street stretched wide and empty between them. The sun hung low, spilling fire across the horizon, shadows long as coffins. The preacher whispered a prayer. No one else dared breathe. Eliza's fingers twitched once at her side. The McCades laughed. But the laughter died when they saw the way she stood, shoulders loose, knees bent, weight balanced. Not the stance of a ranch widow. The stance of a killer who had once walked through storms of bullets and left only silence behind. Recognition flickered in Silas's eyes. No, he muttered. It can't be. His brother sneered. Who is she? Silas swallowed, voice tight. They called her the Whisper. The name shivered through the crowd. An old legend spoken again, reborn in dust and dying light. Eliza's eyes never left theirs. Her hand rested still on the revolver, thumb brushing the hammer. She spoke, voice so soft it was nearly lost to the wind. This ends tonight. The town watched in frozen silence. A tumbleweed rolled through, caught on the stirrup of a waiting horse. A dog barked once, sharp and lonely, then hushed. The McCades shifted, unease threading their bravado. Caleb's hand twitched toward his pistol. Eliza did not move. Her gaze was a knife pressed to their throats. The sun sank lower, bleeding red across the desert, its last light clinging to the revolver at her side. And in that breathless moment, when the world seemed to teeter on the edge of silence and thunder, Eliza Boone, the widow of Red Rock, the woman once called the Whisper, stood tall, her vow carved into the air like scripture. You'll not take Boone ground. You'll not take Boone blood. Not while I draw breath. The street trembled under the weight of it. The storm was coming, and all who watched knew. When the sun fell, so too would men. The last sunset whisper of love. The sun clung to the horizon like a dying flame. Heat shimmered above the dust, the air heavy with silence. Eliza Boone stood in the center of Red Rock's main street, her shadow stretched long and thin, a cross drawn in dirt. Across from her, the McCade brothers shifted, boots grinding gravel, hand hovering close to iron. Sweat gleamed on brows, but their grins were wide and cruel. Last chance, widow, Silas called, voice low, rasping. Walk away, and maybe we'll let you keep breath another day. Eliza's lips barely moved, but her whisper carried, sharp as the strike of a match. I don't walk away. The bell struck once, and the street erupted. Steel flashed. Caleb's pistol cleared leather first, but thunder cracked from Eliza's side, faster, louder, truer. His gun clattered uselessly to the ground before his body followed, dust rising around him. The others roared, guns snapping high. Bullets screamed past, slamming into boards, shattering glass. Townsfolk ducked, low behind barrels, shrieks swallowed by the thunder of gunfire. Eliza moved like shadow, low and fluid, each step precise. Her revolver bucked once, twice. Another McCade spun, clutching his chest before crumpling. The preacher cried out, Lord, deliver us, as echoes rolled through the street. Only two stood now, Silas and Jacob. Silas's face twisted with rage. You ain't no widow, he spat. You're death itself. Eliza's breath was steady, though blood trickled down her arm where a bullet had grazed. She raised her revolver, eyes burning through him. No, I'm promise. Jacob lunged sideways, pistol flaring. Splinters burst from the hitching post beside her. Eliza dropped to one knee, spun, and fired. Jacob's body jerked, fell hard, his gun sliding lifeless across the dust. Silas stood alone. The street was silent, but for the creak of his leather belt and the caw of a crow overhead. Dust curled between them like smoke. His hands trembled as he raised his pistol. Across from him, Eliza stood tall, revolver steady, her hat brim low. He laughed then, high and broken. They'll sing about me, too, woman. The one who killed the Whisper. Eliza's eyes narrowed, the corners of her lips almost softening, as though she heard Jonah's voice on the wind. She whispered, barely audible. This is for him. The last gunshot cracked against the dying sun. Silas McCade fell face first into the dirt, his blood soaking into Boone ground. Silence. Smoke drifted lazy from Eliza's revolver. Her knees buckled once, then steadied. The townsfolk crept from shadows, faces pale with awe. She was the whisper, someone breathed. The legend, another whispered. But Eliza turned from them, her eyes on the horizon where the sun bled out into night. She holstered her revolver slow, each motion heavy as stone. Her steps carried her back toward the ranch road, the preacher calling faint behind her. "Child, Eliza, wait." She did not wait. The ranch stood quiet, the barn's ruins black in moonlight. She tied her horse, then walked to Jonah's grave. Dust still clung to her boots, and blood still dripped faintly from her side, soaking into the earth. She sank to her knees, pressing her hand against the marker. Her voice was soft, worn. "I kept it, Jonah. I kept it all." The wind moved through the canyon, carrying the last whisper of her vow. She closed her eyes, her hand falling limp against the earth. And as the stars spread across the black sky, the widow of Red Rock lay still beside her promise. Years later, old men in saloons leaned close to firelight, their voices hushed. They say she faced them alone, 4 wolves against 1 woman. And she didn't blink. They say the last thing she spoke was love, whispered like a bullet through the wind. And some nights, the oldest of them rasped, "If you stand out in Red Rock Canyon at sunset, you'll hear her still, the whisper riding the wind, keeping her promise." And the story lived on, not as history, but as legend. The legend of Eliza Boone, the last sunset whisper of love.